Hi, I'm Bob Mover, and welcome to On the Real Side. Today, I'm very happy to have with us one of my favorite saxophone players, not only of his generation, but in general, and somebody who I've known for quite a while and have not really had a chance to talk to at length for some time. And, he's been quite active in the music and now living in Paris for quite a while. And I'm really happy to have with us Mr. Rick Margitza. Hi, Rick.
Bob, hi. Really nice to be here with you.
Yeah, I'm happy to have you here. And, actually, we both have books out. Rick has a wonderful book, which is actually a compilation of a collection of things that he was practicing and that continues to practice. And, why don't you let's start out with that, just to talk about how you came about to write this and what it's about.
Sure. Well, it started in 2020, actually. It was New Year's Eve, so that would be 2019. So New Year's Eve night, I went to bed and I listened to a podcast by some Buddhist teacher, and he was talking about starting and completing projects. So that was kind of planted in my subconscious, obviously. And I woke up the next day and I had an idea, because some people were doing 100 days of practice on internet, on Instagram or Facebook, so I thought about doing that.
100 days of
And
musical practice or Buddhist practice?
no, music
Oh,
practice, or they would do 100 days of something. It was kind of like a trend on Instagram. So I had this idea of, what if I posted one idea a day, but for a year? So the book turned into what is now called 365 Days of Practice. So on January 1st, 2020, I posted my first idea with a little description and just went on from there. And what made it kind of easy is I wasn't following any kind of scheme. So I jumped around from whatever kind of struck me that day that I was either working on, or I went into my notebook and revisited, or just thought it would be interesting to share with people. And that was even before, obviously, so that was January 2020. So that was before the pandemic even hit. So it was a couple months after that that we all got locked down. So it kind of turned into a nice way to kind of spend part of the lockdown, is by sharing these ideas with people and getting feedback. And a lot of people said in the process of me posting these ideas that I should turn it into a book, which wasn't my intention at first. So anyway, once the book was finished, I started kind of compiling it in terms of organizing it, so it turned into the current work. And it was released actually January 1st, 2024. So 4 years later, it's now out in the world. And
yeah,
yeah,
published by Chuck Share Publishing
and
Company. And it's a beautiful, great work. It's fantastic. And my book is actually,
thank you.
you're actually the reason for my book. Did you know that? I didn't tell you that.
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah, well, what happened with me was similarly pandemic related. But another thing, I've had this emphysema since 2013. And in 2020, I had this really bad exacerbation of the condition. And I had been intubated many times.
Mhm.
I actually was in a coma for a couple of days. And, you know, they decided the best thing to do was give me a tracheostomy. And so
Wow,
they actually put this in. If I take out the speaker piece, I can't talk.
I didn't know that. I'm sorry to hear you went through that. Wow.
So yeah, well, thank you. But normally, I mean, I won't demonstrate it because it's a little bit like people that
Right.
show. Remember when Lyndon Johnson had that operation? He had appendicitis, and he came out and he showed the country, "Look, this is it." And Lenny Bruce had a great line. Lenny Bruce said, "Boy, we're lucky it wasn't hemorrhoids." Um,
That's good.
You know, so anyway, I had this happen, and I had to spend 4 months in 2 months in the ICU and 2 months in a rehab facility in Queens. And especially at night, they make my wife had to go home, or whoever was visiting as well. That was after 8:15, you're there by yourself all night, and they
Mhm.
don't take great care of you there. Sometimes at night, the night staff is on, and you can be ringing the bell for an hour, nobody's coming. So to keep myself from going crazy, uh, I do things musically because
Mhm.
it was the only time in my life that I'd spent 4 months without my horn.
Wow. Yeah.
I mean, I can't sing. If I try to sing a scale, da 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 da, da my voice is completely gone.
Mhm.
Since I had been singing a little bit on my last couple of records, my joke is I've told somebody that before. Maybe it made a few jazz critics happy that I could no longer. But anyway, being such a, we'll talk about singing and relating that to the horn later. To make my story shorter, I started thinking I would do tunes in 12 keys in my mind and just
Mhm.
run through those kind of things. And then I started to just play these exercises, much like you, just practice in my head the
Mhm.
I call musical equations, or like patterns, for
Right.
lack of a better term. I don't really like the word patterns very much, but so I just think intervallic things.
Mhm. Mhm.
I put them in different keys and try chromatically and do them in half steps, whole steps, major thirds, minor thirds, cyclically, blah blah blah. And then I started when I came out of the hospital. I'd be watching baseball, and I started to write the things down,
Mhm.
and I just kept writing them. And then I thought of you because you had told me that you were doing Rick's Licks, that you were
Right.
doing this project of every day, and I hadn't even thought of it as a book either. I was kind of doing it just to pass the time
Right.
while baseball sometimes can be kind of boring when nothing's happening. You get a pitcher's duel or something. But anyway, I started to, and then a friend of mine came over and said, "What's this?" And I said, "Oh," and he looked through them and he said, "You realize you've got almost 400, at the time it was 300 something." And I didn't want to write 365 because I didn't want to continue that much. Now here's my 365, but so he said, "It's funny, you've written 300 something patterns and you haven't repeated one." So he said, "Maybe this should be a book." So then I had the idea and I put it together. And,
Mhm.
it's, I think it's interesting because Rick and I play differently from each other, but we share a common, some common influences. And,
Absolutely.
you know, and I looked at his patterns, and it's very weird because there are not so many we didn't find too many of the same ones. That's
Mhm.
how good music is.
Yeah.
That we, even within the same subject, we both found a whole different set of ideas. And, I thought, so anyway, I was grateful to Rick because you kind of sort of planted the seed for that. And then I called Chuck Scher.
Mhm.
I didn't even know he was publishing Rick's book. I didn't know who was publishing your book. And so mine is coming out any day now, actually.
That's great. I didn't know that you're until we were talking about putting this podcast together. I didn't realize that you had compiled your ideas and Chuck was putting it out. So I'm really looking forward to getting it and
Yeah,
looking
so
through it, of course.
it's really funny. Chuck just put out the Mike Brecker notebooks, which are like sort of like Mike's collection of licks like that. And I'm very honored, by the way. I found out in Mike's notebooks there are a few patterns there where there's a parenthesis and he says mover.
Mhm.
Mike and I used to practice quite a bit together, and actually studied with each other. That we agreed that we would spend an hour when he was in town. We do an hour each of actually criticizing each other,
Mhm.
and giving each other little lessons to be better. Mike told me about patterns once. He said, "You're too lyrical to play too many patterns." He said, "When you do it, it doesn't sound natural to your style. You have to find a way to work them in where they all of a sudden you're playing this nice lyrical line, and then I hear the patterns come, and I don't know. I say, why is he doing that? Like Mike would criticize me
Right.
like that,
Right.
and I would tell him little things too. But you know, um, Well, now that I want to get into your life and everything, but the idea with patterns, when because the thing with you too is when you do use them, they're always so musical, and how do you get people to use them, but in a lyrical fashion? How did you work upon that? Was there any way, or was it just completely intuitive? But
I think it just has to be an objective because that's something that I still kind of work on. And I think throughout my development as a player, it's become less patterny. When I was younger, those would come out. And even though I was aware of not wanting to play them, I guess I didn't have the ability or the vocabulary enough to not play them or not rely on them. But like I said, if it's an objective that you really want to ultimately get away from sounding like or just playing patterns, then you find ways to change them. Or when I'm practicing, I say, okay, when I practice, I divide my time into, first of all, practicing all the patterns and kind of parallel stuff. But then I also take, like, say, the last hour of my session and just play. And when I'm in that zone, I say, you can't play the same thing more than twice in a row. So if it's a 4-note grouping, I force myself to try to not to play it more than twice. And then I try to change it into something so it doesn't sound so symmetric. But it's something that is kind of just an ongoing struggle. And I think the more in touch you are with your vocabulary, that stuff kind of works its way out when you're playing in a way.
yeah, I always think that there's vocabulary and there's ideas.
Mhm.
And part of the name of the game is to take vocabulary, just like we do with speech.
Yep.
You can know an awful lot of big words, an awful lot of, and be throwing around anachronistic and theological and all of these, as somebody used to say, big words like mayonnaise, and you know, and yet somehow they have to be uh, an idea and not just pure vocabulary. And a lot of people, and I think especially at schools, because you don't have a lot of people now with the playing experience that cats like you and I have, just showing people, well, this is sort of the end result of what you're aiming for. Whereas, I tell people that these things are like in Zen, they tell you that when you point your finger at the moon, never mistake your finger for the moon.
Yeah,
You know,
that's a good one.
they're like these are fingers that are pointing at the moon, but the moon is the actual,
Yeah,
idea.
yeah.
And well, there are a lot of Lester Young said that jazz is an art, a science, and a philosophy. And so, some of these philosophical things, like when you did a wonderful interview with our friend Jay Metcalf, and I
Mhm.
got to thank Jay for some of the preparation I did to talk to Rick, because there is not so much written about Rick out there the way there should be. But this interview was very in depth, and Jay asked good questions, and Jay's So among the things you guys got into, um, thinking and playing, for instance. So obviously, both of our books are meant to inspire thought,
Mhm.
but then they're also meant. I think I get that feeling with your book too. They're meant to inspire the next step, which is going beyond thought and into what Sonny Rollins called the stream of consciousness.
Exactly.
And I think that not playing something more than twice, putting little rules to it, um, might help you make that transition, into from conscious thought into no thought.
Exactly. Yeah.
'Cause
Well, I remember when I first met Michael, one of the first questions I asked him was, "Are you thinking when you're playing?" because that was a dilemma for me. And he said, yes. And he said, somebody like Joe Henderson has the ability to think really quick when he plays. But then years later, I heard an interview and somebody asked Michael, are you thinking when you play? And he said, no. So I think it's both. I think the thinking comes in like a really kind of the macro thing in terms of global decisions, maybe formal decisions. And it's not even conscious thinking, but it's some part of your subconscious that makes a decision for you. But the macro thinking happens when you practice, but ultimately that's not part of stream of consciousness. So I want to kind of eliminate that when I'm playing in front of an audience.
Yeah, I think I mean, as someone who practiced a lot with Mike and having had that experience too, that was something we used to discuss. And we came to a semi conclusion. And I mean, that's the beautiful thing that you might think one thing, one day, yes, I do think and play.
Uh-huh.
And then, no, I don't. And like Lee Konitz and Len Tristano warned, basically, were very much, it is impossible to think and play, actually to think and play. And I think what Mike and I came about as a result, what the end result of that way of thinking was that yes, when you practice, you think, and then you see, you kind of play something so much that the unconscious absorbs it.
Yeah.
And you know that's it. To know something so well that you no longer think about it. Like you know, in colleges sometimes cats aren't really playing to something isn't making it, and I try to find almost like a psychiatrist. I'm sitting there, well, what is your block?
A lot of it is that, yeah, absolutely.
What's blocking? He says, well, I'm thinking. I said, are you thinking of the names of the changes as you're playing? You know, no, man, just listen and understand the big picture. You know, that moving a major third here, it's moving like this. Understand how the roadmap goes, and then when you practice, maybe get into the individual elements. Okay, here, what are my options? Oh, I could use a half step cyclic substitution. I could use a flat and fifth substitution here. I could play this as diminished or whatever. But if you're thinking about that stuff as you're playing, then I wouldn't say wrong, because I don't like wrong and right, but you don't know it well enough yet.
Yeah. Well, I also listen to Michael make the analogy of practicing is like you're just putting all this information into a computer. But then when you play, whatever you've practiced ultimately just comes out in the best case scenario. So there's this process that to me, it's like there's a lot of, especially when you practice, there's a lot of accessing information. So say, for example, the first thing is like, I learned a Charlie Parker lick and I had to have enough composure to on the spot think of that Charlie Parker lick, access it, and then execute it. And that happens at a very slow pace when you're first starting. And then ultimately, if your goal is not to sound like somebody else, is you think of that Charlie Parker lick, but you decide not to play it and play something that you've maybe come up with that is based on that idea. And then the next step is that stuff that you've come up with will just kind of come out, and just trust the process, but it's slow sometimes.
Yeah, I think that you have to be, you know, Joe DiOrio always said there are three things that make a monster. He always said that a monster. He said patience, courage, and skill.
Wow.
And he said that's the, you know, you want to strive for patience, courage, and skill. And maybe the most important of all of them is the patience.
Yeah.
You know,
I remember Dave Liebman once saying that it takes 6 months for something that you practice to come out naturally. And that really pissed me off because I thought that's too long. I don't want to wait that long.
Yeah,
but,
right.
You know, so maybe when I'm in the practice room, I can kind of, that's what you do when you're in the practice room, is you kind of force that thing. But really when you're in front of an audience and just trying to interact with other musicians and be stream of consciousness, that is not going to come out until it's ready naturally.
Right, because I think you have to realize that, at least for me, the very first thing about playing is to listen.
Yeah.
What's on around you. And sometimes if you over practice too, I found you can get so involved in your own, your own stuff, your own shit, and what you're doing because you've been practicing this and that and this and that, that you almost aren't listening to
I
the
know.
the same. Do you
Yeah.
ever find that? I mean, in your
Yes.
development?
Yeah. And I remember Pat Metheny was talking about Herbie, and this phrase stuck with me. He said Herbie is one of the few musicians who doesn't come to the gig with an agenda.
Uh-huh.
And this idea of coming to the gig with an agenda it can mean many things, but for me, it's like, all right, I'm going to try to work in this thing that I was practicing earlier today, and that defeats the purpose. So this idea of just coming to the gig and not having an agenda, just like you said, listening more and just being part of what's happening instead of this is about me and working in this thing that I think is hip that I've just been working on,
Yeah, you hear a lot of that. That's especially common among university educated players. You know what I mean? Not all of them,
Sure.
but
Yeah.
a lot of the time you hear that kind of thing. Like you practice it, and now there are times when you say, okay, I mean, maybe if 10% of your playing is that, because I mean you are working on certain things. You might be working on an idea, and you say, well, okay, this tune is a good. Let me, next tune. I mean, I'll confess to that. I don't want to tell people I think that way sometimes, but I try not to. But I'll say, if I was working on, I'm working on an idea of, like something like, not that one.
Right.
The neck is funny. So I'll say, well, somewhere tonight, I'm going to use that.
Right.
So if I'm playing the bridge of rhythm, I'm going like,
Mhm.
you etc. But I'm trying to do that, and when I'm practicing, I'll be working it out, and you hear all the mistakes that I make, and then you go to the gig and you say, well, let me see if I can work that in twice tonight.
Right. Right. I mean, I find that if I go to a jam session at people's houses, or you're just playing, in somebody's basement or whatever, and not in front of an audience, then I could take the time to maybe play things that are maybe not completely natural, but I find that to be a good venue for trying to work in ideas. But the minute you get into a performance situation where you're actually playing in front of people trying to communicate something, that's when I think the thought has to kind of take a back seat.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, that's where, I'm amazed at somebody like, I mean, Warren Marsh to me um, sounds so prepared,
Mhm.
yet he sounds like he doesn't have any agenda. There's something about, I've been listening a lot to Warren, well, all my life, but lately,
Yeah.
kind of revisiting him. And I'm sitting there and really checking out. I mean, the internet is really, I got to say something about YouTube, man. I mean, you can get whole nights, whole sets.
It's extraordinary. I know.
It's like a time machine. I go back to, I found the first gig that I ever heard Sonny Rollins play live, March
Wow.
14th. I remember because it was my mother's birthday, March 14th, and I was about to turn 20. It was 1972. And there it was on the internet that whole night. Albert Daly on piano.
Holy shit. Wow. That's
Yeah.
incredible.
So it just brought me back to I remembered what they played, and it was amazing. I still remembered the tunes. I kind of remembered, oh yeah, they play this. When are they going to play Easy to Remember? Oh yeah, that was the third tune.
Holy shit. Wow.
But but lately, I mean, the thing is with Warren. Also, I had a funny conversation with Lee Codens and Sonny. I used to talk to them on the phone.
Mhm.
Sometimes Lee would say something, and I'd call Sonny. I'd say, what do you think of this? Lee just said this about improvising, and how do you relate to that? And Lee had said something in his book which was a little bit double-sided about something about Sonny, but Sonny hadn't, of course, read it, and I didn't want to really start anything. But he said, "Well, there's a completely improvising, trying not to play anything that you've played before, and Sonny says, and he says Sonny does that sometimes. He doesn't always do it." And I said, "Well, Sonny, what do you think?" Sonny says, "Well, tell Lee them's fighting words." He said, "But the thing is," he says, "well, what does he expect you to do?" Like he said, that's like if we decide we're just going to speak, and am I going to just go about, I mean, it just, you got to have a premise.
You got to
That's
have, yeah, exactly, sure, someplace to start.
So, and then you let it evolve. So that's, but Lee was saying you can try to play entirely, let's eliminate that. You don't even start an idea with a premise. Just put the air through the horn and see where it takes you.
See what happens.
So, another thing, Rick, in that interview with Jay that interested me, is you have this expression that you used, that you use in your teaching, and probably in teaching yourself, educating your instincts. And
Yeah.
I kind of, that interested me. Could you explain that concept to me, please? To us?
Yeah, well, I think it's kind of just another way of saying what we've been talking about. It's like when you practice and you force yourself to whatever limits you impose or conditions you impose on yourself when you're practicing, you're making yourself stronger. So, that's why when I practice, I try to think a lot, because I feel like I'm making the synapses in my connection in my brain stronger. And to me, that makes the macro part of myself and the subconscious part of myself just more developed, stronger. So when I am trying to play in the moment, those instinctual things that happen in the moment are sharper because of the kind of work you've done in the practice room. So it's almost like say like I make the analogy sometimes between like a track, somebody who runs track, like a 100-yard dash. They go in the weight room and they're lifting weights, and you would think, well, you don't have to be that strong in your arms to be a fast runner or whatever, but you're training your whole body. So when you're actually on the track, you just get faster because you're stronger. I don't know if that's the best analogy, but I sometimes kind of think about that.
Like parts
so
of a whole.
Yeah. So like basketball players, why should they lift weights? They just have to be fast and be able to, they're not football players. But basketball players, they're just making every part of their body as strong as possible. So they're able to react and do what they need to do in the moment. So that analogy kind of works, I guess. But
I understand.
To me, the kind of practicing where like you said, practicing in your head. When I used to go jogging, I would practice certain tunes in all 12 keys just to try to make that all those connections in your brain that happen when you're improvising stronger. And to me, that educates my instincts. So when I'm in the bandstand in the moment, things just seem to happen faster because of the work I've done to prepare myself. I don't know if that's.
When I was very young, when I was 13, I actually got to know Stan Getz. And Stan, I had just been playing. I mean, just a few months actually when I met him.
Mhm.
And he was very nice. He stayed down the street from us in a motel in Miami Beach, and actually let me play his horn.
Wow.
And because he wasn't, I said, "You don't practice at all." He said, "Well, you see, I practice in my head." I
Mhm.
said, "Really? How do you do that? What is that about?" He said, "Well, it started when I was a kid." He said he had joined Jack Teagarden's band when he was 15 years old, and and for the first 2 years he played the saxophone. He practiced 8 hours a day. But and he played bassoon before that, much like you started on a double reed. We'll get
Mhm.
into that. But he said, but then when he got on the road, they had gigs and they were on a bus and there was no time to actually pick up the horn. And it's not like in the movies like the Five Pennies of Danny Kaye movie. They're all playing on the bus.
Right. Yeah. That doesn't
Nobody will
happen.
do that, you know. So um, they, you know, so he said, so he had to learn to practice in his head.
Hmm.
And he said, still, he said he keeps sharp. He would go. He loves to sit under a tree. He'd get a bottle of wine and sit under the tree and just think of tunes and imagine where
Yeah.
it would be on the instrument. And even if you don't have perfect pitch, but you're imagining that in the key of G flat on the horn, you're thinking. Some people actually move their fingers. He
Yeah.
said way to do that, but then he decided he wasn't even going to do that. He was going to move his fingers in his head.
Hmm. Hmm.
So, and so, so I think that type of thing. And the other thing, like, did you do a lot of singing? I'm thinking, you have a very singing sound, and I know you come from a musical family, which we're going to get into that.
Yeah.
And some people I think that maybe one of the best way of ear training is just to sing, even if you don't know what you're singing. If you could sing a Lester Young solo, how much of that did you?
My voice is so bad that I'm kind of even embarrassed to sing in front of myself sometimes, but it's kind of there's a humming sometimes, but I whistle more than I actually sing. Um, but yeah, there's definitely that connection of hearing a melody and being able to sing something, or hearing a chord and imagining a melody and then singing it over the chord, that even if you can't physically really produce the notes accurately, to me that's a big part of playing melodically.
Yeah,
um, yeah, so I can't really sing physically, but there's part of me that does imagine that, and like I said, I whistle sometimes when I'm trying to hear a line or imagine something.
so you physicalize it
Yeah,
in some
yeah.
way. It's not just something in your head, but
Hmm.
you. I mean, I've had a big adjustment to make because I sang everything from the time I was a child. I could sing all these. I mean, I could sing rock and roll records before I started listening to jazz, but
Wow.
it was natural. Whatever I heard, I sang, and
Hmm.
now I can't reproduce that. So it's a weird thing to just not go. There's no,
Yeah. Oh, that's got to be hard.
but the thing is though, Tom Harrell is funny. I said to Tom, we were talking once, and I asked him, Tom, how much do you sing? I said, I never really hear you singing much, nor can I really imagine Tom singing
Right.
too much. But nevertheless, I said, Tom says, I don't really sing, but I can whistle my ass off.
So, oh, that's funny. That's funny.
And now your early life is very fascinating. As Barry Harris told a friend of mine once when he told Barry that his mother had been a famous singer and this and that. He said, Barry turned to me and said, "Oh, you come from the music." Like, I was like, you come from this tribe. And your background. I mean, your father was you grew up near Detroit, right? It was it.
I grew up, yeah, near Detroit, and in Dearborn. Yeah, my father was a violinist in the Detroit Symphony for over 30 years, so I grew up hearing a lot of classical music in the house. But one thing I think is really cool is that he was also a part of the nucleus of string players from the orchestra that was used for the Motown recordings.
Ah,
So
Stevie
when you hear all
Wonder,
that Stevie
Diana
Wonder,
Ross.
Marvin Gaye, all that stuff from that era, my father was one of the violinists on that. So I also grew up hearing all this great Motown music as well as classical music from my father. Um, and his father was a Hungarian gypsy. Well, our origin is gypsy from Eastern Europe. So my grandfather on my father's side was a Hungarian gypsy violinist, so I heard a lot of folk music coming from him. And then my mother's father, so my maternal grandfather, he played bass with Glenn Miller, and he also played cello on Berg with Strings. So that's him at the beginning of Just Friends, is my grandfather. Da, 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 da. Right, exactly. Yeah. So unfortunately, he died when I was really young, so I never got a chance to talk to him about it. But um, so I heard jazz because my mother really grew up with jazz in the house through her dad. So I heard all these different types of music without any kind of labels attached to them, and all
She
intertwined.
wasn't Hungarian, right? She was of a different ethnic persuasion. Which what
Who
was your
was?
mom?
My mom was also gypsy. So, man, my mother's side, they come from Czechoslovakia, and my father's side comes from Budapest. Um, so down to all my great grandparents, like everybody is, we call ourselves Roma, Roma.
But you're a pure Roma.
Yeah,
That's interesting. 'Cause,
yeah.
uh,
So I grew up hearing music at funerals and weddings, and almost everybody in my family, down to all of my cousins, play, and a lot of them are just self-taught, incredibly talented, um, but also not very schooled. So some of them kind of hit a wall because they can't read music, for example, but amazing feels and a lot of soul and
was there
yeah.
a first music that you kind of, gravitated to, um, on your own? Let's say, was there something that like that might have been on the radio or might have been, so what did you favor as a child? Do you remember anything that,
Well, I think my first thing was classical because I heard my father practicing in the house and um, him playing recordings. So uh, they do tell the story of I had my own little record player, and I had a recording of the Brahms Violin Concerto by Heifetz, and I would sit in front of the record player and pretend like I was conducting to the Brahms Violin Concerto because, yeah, Heifetz. I grew up with Heifetz playing, so that was kind of the first thing before I heard anything else. And then I started playing violin when I was really young. My grandfather taught me how to play just some little Hungarian folk songs. And then I think when I was about 10 or 11, I started studying classical piano because that was kind of what my father wanted me to do. And I was really into the music of Liszt and uh, what else was there?
so you got some chops?
Oh, I used to be able to play. I could play. I can't play in time anymore. I could just play, I could play rubato. Um, but yeah, so the first thing was classical music, but then of course I heard, a lot of the Motown stuff coming, kind of seeping in. And then one day I was playing clarinet and oboe in junior high school because you couldn't play a saxophone at first. You had to play
You had to play adult.
clarinet and oboe. Yeah. And so my mother said, "You want to hear what an oboe sounds like on a recording?" And she put on Bird with Strings because Mitch Miller was playing on his recordings. And when I heard Bird like that for the first time, that's kind of what kind of flipped the switch for me.
You felt something when you heard Bird.
Yep.
This was uh, this was new, so to speak. I mean,
That was, so to speak. And then I had a cousin, she was a little older than me, who was also really into jazz, and she turned me on to the Brecker brothers. So it was like the first couple Brecker brothers recordings and Chuck Mangione with Jerry Nywood. So this would have been
very
like the
nice
early,
guy, good player.
yeah. So yeah, but to this day he's one of my top influences because of the way he plays melody and his sound on soprano and just his feel and so he's like in my DNA really strongly, Jerry. So it was Jerry and Michael and Bird, and then I call it the white Jewish tenor school. So it was Grossman and Mincer and Liebman, Bob Berg.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating that there was a whole school of Jewish tenor players that were coming out of Coltrane,
It's
and a
incredible.
couple generations before, there was a whole school of Jewish tenor players that were coming out of Lester Young,
Yeah,
Stan
yeah,
Getz, and Al Cohn, and Herbie Stewart, and Alan Eager, and I think the only like Zoot was the only guy that was not. He's sort of like Berganzi, who was the
yeah.
only guy who wasn't Jewish. What I mean? So he was in there too. But, I played a duet one day with Jerry Nywood. We were both getting our horns repaired by Saul Fromkin
Oh,
in
really?
the repair shop.
Uh-huh.
And I played a lot of nice duets in that repair shop. Well, you'd be getting, the junior cook would come in, whoever it was. Jimmy Lyons. But you know, I remember I had a nice. The only time I really got to hang with Jerry, we were
Hmm.
for our horns and we were talking about life and music and people we knew. You know, just beautiful person. And then we had our horns ready around the same time, so we just started playing some together.
Oh man, I would give anything to have heard that. Wow.
Two sopranos, and you know that was you know, and his son Adam is a monster too. You know, Adam is a hell of a tenor player, and he does repairs and makes mouthpieces, and you
He's brilliant. Yeah, I
know,
it's a really quick kind of funny story. Jerry I found out was playing in Toronto at George's, and this was when I was still living in Detroit, so it was about a 3 hour, 3.5 hour drive from Detroit. So I decided to drive there to hear him for a couple nights, and I asked him for a lesson, and he said yeah. So I went over to his hotel and hung out with him for an afternoon. But I was so naive that I just thought you went out and hung out with people, and I just walked away without asking him what he charges because I didn't think that that's what you do. So I just walked out and never paid him because I didn't think that was part of the process, and it haunted me for a long time. Once I realized what I had done, even though I didn't do anything on purpose. So Adam years later came and asked me to take a lesson. So I said, I will teach you as long as you don't pay me anything and we tell your father that I'm paying it forward now.
that you're even
So
now.
yeah, so we had a really we talked about that and we had a really great laugh about it, and you know, we kind of sealed the circle. So I know I've known Adam for a long time.
Yeah, so that's
He's a great
beautiful.
cat.
Yeah, and you know, and Jerry, I never really, I didn't really get to hear Jerry stretch out. You know, I heard him, you know, with Mangione and stuff, but I didn't really hang. We had a lot of the same friends and everything, but he wasn't at the same sessions or whatever it was.
Right.
You know, but you know, I used to hang with the Jewish tenor players circle. I think they kind of liked having me around because I was the only one that didn't play like Coltrane. Though I got a lot of Coltrane. I love Coltrane, and I got a lot of it through osmosis.
Right.
Just hanging out, you know, you play at a session, it's got Davis there, and Mike is there, and Steve Rosen, and Bob Berg was the other one.
Sure.
Bob was out for blood. Bob took no prisoners. He
Yep.
was, you know, you know, so, you know, it's different degrees of competitiveness too. You know, that's interesting. Some people really are out to get you, and then other people are okay with that. They want to play with you.
Right.
Like when you and I used to play together, I never had that feeling. You know, I mean, that anybody was out to get each other. I thought, you know, even though you know we were alto and tenor, but the thing was that I think we were more concerned with the blend, and I like that about you.
Of course. And I, you know, whenever I played, I was just playing more for your acceptance because I idolized you. So it was more about just trying to be as good as I can be, just like I said, to be kind of taken in. But yeah, I'm not one of those guys who likes to go to sessions and try to bump heads with people. That's not part of my
Yeah, you know,
nature.
like Michael wasn't like that either. He was like really non-competitive. He liked to play counterpoint,
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
like that, which a lot of people hadn't done. Where you know, I mean, I'll tell you, there were two times in my life where I actually was sent home crying and wanting to quit music.
Really.
And those two people that did it to me were Bob Berg one day, absolutely cut me to say he didn't always do it, but
Uh-huh.
that particular day, man, he was on, and I was like just beaten up. I was, you
Wow.
know. And then Ronnie Cuber did that to me one night too.
Really
Yeah, I
interesting.
played a set with Ronnie, and I felt like I'd been mugged. I mean, it was great. I mean, I learned a lot, and I loved listening to him. And the same with Bob, you know what I mean? But it was like the only two times in my life where I said, "Am I sure I'm doing the right thing?" I mean, and oh, I was thinking one. Oh gosh, I had a good question for you. Oh yes, the teacher in high school. That was I was concerned. You mentioned a guy named Joe, who was a high school music teacher of yours, and he liked Lenny Tristano and Lee and Warren.
Oh, Jack. Absolutely. Yeah, his
Yeah.
name was Jack Pearson, whose son turned out to be Matt Pearson, who was a producer. Well, there's another big
That
circuit
was
of,
the story of your life, which I'll get to in a minute. I remember, I didn't know that he was his son,
yeah, Matt is Jack's son.
and he was in Detroit too,
Yeah.
in high school. He was a high school teacher, and he encouraged your interest in. So you were hearing. I'm thinking you're listening. We're back to your high school for a minute.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And you listen to Michael and Jerry Nywood, and then you're getting turned on. You're hearing Train and some of those people. But at the same time, were you hearing Lenny and Warren and Lee through Jack?
Yes, but not at first. At first, it was mainly the guys you just mentioned, and so, not a lot of Coltrane, but some Coltrane and Bird, of course, and some Cannonball, because my mother had some Cannonball records. But when I got to high school with Jack, he's the one who turned me on to Lenny and Warren and Lee, and he got me into this whole thing about not playing cliches and trying to really be original like those guys were. So he definitely opened up that part of me about trying to find something that doesn't sound like other people, and where you're really improvising. And of course, Warren and Lee and Lenny was the model for that. So that's how I got turned on to that whole school, is through Jack in like 10th grade.
Did you have any experience later in life? Did you ever? We'll get to that. I want to know about you living in New York and that period.
Mhm.
Everything. You know, I'm very curious about what happened to you there and how things evolved. But did you ever get to know Lee or Lenny or Warren or any of the Tristano
Um,
people?
I saw Warren a couple times with Super Sax, and I didn't get a chance to talk to him other than after this concert. I walked up and just asked for his autograph. And I said, I was like in high school, I said, "You're my favorite guy out of all of these guys." And at this point, I was just playing alto. He asked me, "What do you play?" I said, "I play alto." He says, "Well," he said, "you haven't gotten to the big guy yet," talking about the tenor. So that's the only interaction I had with Warren, but he was really friendly, and I still have his autograph. I saved
Oh,
it.
that's
You know,
funny.
yeah.
So your first saxophone was alto. So you were playing clarinet and oboe.
Mhm.
And now, was your mother a musician in the sense that she play something, or?
She didn't, but she sings and sort of sang, and she still sings. And I mean, to this day, when we'll put on recordings, she'll sing like the inner voices of the harmony moving. She has that kind of ear, and she grew up singing a lot with Barbra Streisand records and Ella. Um, so she has amazing ears, but she never really studied music formally.
uh And right, so the clarinet, the oboe, and then alto. Uh, you know, how did you start to play alto? What was your first horn? And give me a little.
Well, yeah, at the school, I remember they had a Martin. There was a Martin at the school, so that's my first alto, and I think they had a Busher as well. And before I ever got, at that point is when I started listening to Jerry. So I really got into the soprano and then the tenor after that. So I think my first tenor was an early Herb Cuff,
Oh,
who was at that point, he had a music store in somewhere near Detroit, and we traded that one in for Selmer. I got a later Mark 6, and I had a Yanagasawa soprano. Well, but I always wanted to get a Selmer soprano, so we were able to finally get one after a certain amount of time. I don't exactly remember when that happened. So it was around 10th grade where I switched to tenor and was playing tenor in the stage band, basically. Or yeah, in junior high it was kind of just called the stage band, but in high school it was the jazz ensemble, and that's when we started going to different festivals and competitions and kind of got more introduced into the jazz education kind of network. That was kind
that
of,
was a pretty good band.
yeah, that was under Jack Pearson.
Oh, okay. So he was.
Yeah.
I see. So then I was thinking, you graduate high school, and you spent a year at Wayne State University.
Mhm.
Now, at this time, had you already decided that your career path was going to be music, or were you considering anything else, or did you have other, considerations, or were you right into music?
Yeah, that of course there's one part of me that thought I was going to be a baseball player.
Uh,
Like
I would
all
have
of
been a
us when we're
baseball
about.
player too, had I had any talent at all, but I didn't.
I was actually pretty good. But it was just kind of like, when you're 9, 10 years old, that's what you want to do. I was a huge Mickey Mantle fan, so I taught myself how to switch hit and
Me
uh,
too.
played in Little League, and
Number seven, man.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah, he was my man, and just there was something mystical almost about Mickey Mantle, and a magical thing, and the fact that such a story that he could play with that osteomyelitis
Yeah,
and be in pain and have to be taped up like that, and then go out and play baseball, and then later I found out about the, you know, the, the other side of Mickey when he was a. I love the rebellious side of him too. I love the fact that he
yeah,
was a goody guy. You know, they used to say when he opened his restaurant in New York, he had a restaurant for a while.
right, right.
But he said he'd come in every night and just find out which table Mickey was under. And
No, we're talking about YouTube. There are a couple great documentaries about him that I've loved watching recently. Just stuff about him that I never knew, and just to see his whole story and to see clips of him actually playing, because I never saw him live. So it's pretty amazing.
well, one thing with Mickey, he being such a hero, man, being such a real natural athlete that he was. I was not. I was born with gross motor difficulty, they called it.
Uh-huh.
And they told my parents when I was born, this kid better be a scholar because he's not going to be able to do anything that requires real coordination.
Wow.
And this hung me up because when I played piano, I tried to play piano really young.
Mhm.
I would go to the piano and I pick out these melodies and that kind of thing. I play everything in the key of C. But my parents said, "Gee, he's got a real interest in music. Let's give him." And I liked Bach, and when I learned to play Bach, some of the inventions, I played the right hand at one time, and then the left hand, but I couldn't put them together.
Wow.
So it was totally frustrating. And even more frustrating was baseball because I
Mhm.
scored baseball. I mean, I was like, I had memorized all these baseball cards. I knew all the statistics of how many consecutive games Lou Gehrig had played and all of, like Ted Williams. I was in Boston.
Yeah.
So, Ted Williams was another hero of mine, but the Red Sox were not a winning team. You know what I mean? So it was harder to. I would go to, when we went to Fenway Park, I'd always root for the Red Sox unless they were playing the Yankees.
Right.
Wore my Yankees hat and my jacket and all of that. But one thing my father did explain that was interesting. My dad was a trumpet player with Tommy Dorsey's band. He had his own big band. He had been friends with Serge Shaloff on Henry Hutton's band, and he was a very good musician. My dad. He also played the theremin, and
Really? I didn't know that about.
yeah, I grew up with the
Good
saxophone
background.
in the house, and
Hmm.
but he was not a patient guy. Let's
Hmm.
just put it this way, I mean, he was very impatient, and he'd yell at me when I couldn't read the music well, and these kind of things. So I won't go too deep into that. But one time, when I was really, he'd go out and he'd pitch baseballs to me, and I really stunk. And I try, and I got on the little league, and I actually got a few hits,
Hmm.
but nothing there. And I really want to be a baseball player. And my dad gave me a book about Lou Gehrig. He said Lou Gehrig was not a natural. Babe was a natural. Mickey, Willie Mays, those
Yeah.
guys are naturals. You're just not a natural. But the story is Lou Gehrig worked so hard that you can become really great even if you're not a natural. But he said you might think about. He said I think with music you're kind of a natural.
Hmm.
Oh, and
Interesting.
so you have to accept the gifts you're given.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I
So
remember reading Ted Williams' The Science of Hitting.
yeah, yeah, I know that book.
That's a great book. So I was into it also just from that part of it, just the analytical part, and Mickey Mantle's The Quality of Courage.
Oh, I didn't read that.
Yeah, that's a great one. His autobiography. Um,
Uh,
but
well,
yeah,
you
so
see,
yeah.
I think that that's an interesting thing too. Getting back to what Pres said, being an art, a science, and a philosophy. that, people that really love baseball, it's a sport and a science and a philosophy.
Absolutely.
But there's really that, and some of the deeper cats, there's sort of a parallel between, I think jazz musicians and maybe other musicians, and but there's a in it being a complete philosophy along with everything. So okay, so you went to Wayne State for a year,
Went to Wayne State for a year.
and then you went to Berkeley right after that.
I took a semester off, and then I went to Berkeley for one semester. So this would have been the spring semester in 1981, because I had a friend in Michigan who was going to school there. So he said you should check out the school. Um, so I went, but since it was the middle of the year, I couldn't get placed with any teacher because everybody was booked. So I found the school itself to be frustrating, but it was the first time I was away from home. And at the same time, like Dave Kukoski was there, Danny Walsh, Jeff Watts. So I met all these musicians, and these musicians from all over the world, and like playing all the time. And just this idea of just being away from home and learning. I was practicing like, 6, 7, 8 hours a day. It was just this really fertile
Well,
time.
that's funny because you were there in 1981, end of 1980, 1981. I took a rest from New York and went up to Boston, and Kikoski, Jeff Watts, all those guys you mentioned, Doug Webb. I mean, you didn't
Yep.
mention him, but all of those cats, Jeff, they were my students. Branford Marsalis was there, Makoto Ozone.
hmm
I mean, and you were there, and I somehow we didn't meet then.
We never crossed paths, but now that I remember hearing of you, and maybe I even went to one of your gigs or something, but I was like also really kind of shy, so I didn't, mingle or get into the thing that much. So maybe, but I definitely was aware of you, but it wasn't maybe until Miami that we met, I think.
I remember that.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, I was so that was what. Did you get to know Jimmy Mosher at all?
I was aware of him, but I never met him. No.
Yeah. So you missed. Did you meet? You might have met Garzone up there though. He was also teaching with Patrick.
George, no, George wasn't there yet, but I met Bergonzi. I went to one of his gigs, um, and they were just there. I learned a lot from bootlegs, like most of us. So there's one night that I recorded Bergonzi, and there's one night that I recorded Bob Berg. I had not heard Michael live yet, but those two tapes kind of are huge influences on my development, just
Well,
because I heard them on.
yeah, yeah. I'm sorry. Right around
No,
that
yes.
time, Matheny was playing at Riles a lot, and he would have different cats come in and play with him there. I think he had Mike and he had Bob Berg.
hmm
And was that the period that you?
No, I wasn't aware of Pat yet. So Bob Berg, I think, was with Tiger Okoshi.
Yeah,
Steve Johns was playing drums, and Bob
like that.
Berg was, I forget who Bob was playing with, just some more local guys, but both were great nights. So to those days, like there are just a couple formative tapes that I have. And then um, at one point after that, I think when I left Boston, some friends of mine from Detroit, we drove to New York because we saw that Liebman was playing at the Vanguard with Quest. So I have 2 nights of that live, and then also we drove to New York again because um, Steps Ahead was recording the Paradox album. So those are 2 live Michael nights that I have. So they're like these 5 or 6 recordings that I have bootlegs that made a huge influence on me, as well as, of course, the commercially available records and stuff. But there's something about the live tapes and seeing it go down live.
Yeah, there's something about that, and just who you grow up hearing live, getting a chance to actually hear them. I was lucky to hear a lot of the previous generation like that, so that was
Yeah.
really. Um, give me 1 second here, Jess.
Mm.
I've got to cough, and I might need it. I sometimes have to have suction taken My
Mhm.
wife will come in and do it, but I think I can. I'm good for another few minutes. I know you
Okay.
don't have all day, but I mean, I wanted to do. I'm sorry, the food's getting cold, but now I want to talk a bit.
No, no, don't worry about mine. No, I'm fine.
I mean, I'm having a good time talking to you.
Me too.
Um, can we continue?
Yep.
So, one semester at Berkeley, which is interesting because that was a period where, I mean, I was, we talk about that sometimes the universe just tells you some things, and it may not be the way you think life is going to go or even should go,
Yeah.
because, I just, New York, I had been playing regularly at Sweet Basil every Sunday and Monday or 1 week a month for about 2 years. And they sold Sweet Basil and they started to get other people in there, the Chico Freeman, Arthur Blythe, people that weren't playing similar to the way I played or that style. And had I been a better businessman and, had an agent or something, I would have walked down the street of the Vanguard. I
Yeah.
knew Max. I should say, Max, can I get a gig here? I've been over at Sweet Basil for these 2 years, but it didn't occur to me. So Sweet Basil, I was like, now I don't have a home, to play in. And, and I'm getting a little tired. And I met somebody, a girl. I thought I should get married and get away. My father's in Boston. Anyway, my own personal life, whatever.
Hmm.
I said, let me go to Boston. And then I got to Boston and I missed New York, man. It was like, even though there were great musicians there, but I decided I was going to teach at Berkeley. And, Larry Monroe and Alex Ulanowski gave me limited gigs. I,
Hmm.
I wanted more. And they said, no, we want you to still like teaching and like people. If you teach too much, you're going to become bitter. And we're going to be the guys that killed Bob Mover. They said, you'll grow to hate everything. I said, I don't know. I never did that. But they gave me a few classes and they gave me the best. They gave me the nines. They gave me a
Hmm.
whole
Hmm.
class.
Yeah.
And they gave
Yeah.
me a class of Europeans, which later on in life, for the next 20 years, a lot of the best Europeans went back to their countries and became the top players there. And then they would send for me
Hmm.
to do a tour with them. So
Right.
that kept me going without having a major record company or that kind of thing. So I was fortunate to have that experience at Berkeley. And later on, it turned out Wallace Roney was one of my students there,
Hmm.
and we played in the Art Matthews band together. But the stuff that I'm sitting there kind of going, what am I doing here? And then it turned out, wow, I met people that employed me for the next 20 years.
It opened other doors later on.
And
Sure.
came back to New York, and I knew all these cats from Berkeley, and
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
next generation of of the New York people. So it's funny how that happened. So now you've gone when right after Berkeley.
Yeah.
Did you? Is that when you went to Miami?
Yeah. I took I was home for the summer, and Matt Pearson, who's Jack's son, also played trumpet. Um, we weren't at the same high school. He was in a different part of he was in Livonia, Michigan. Anyway, Matt was going to school at the University of Miami, and he said, you should really check out the program down here. There are some great teachers and some great players. So, as a result of Matt, he got me interested in the school, and I went down there and auditioned and got a scholarship and went there for, I think I was there for a year, and met some really great, yeah, some great players who ended up being in New York down the line. But also there are a couple of great teachers. One guy in particular named Vince Maggio,
Yeah, Vince Maggio.
who was one of my formative, like him and Jack Pearson are guys who really planted certain kind of just like core values in terms of improvising and how to develop a solo and not play cliches and all these things that I like are still really important to me, obviously.
Vince
So
was
my
very.
time there, man, my time there was great because of those couple teachers and just the guys I was. Andy Schnitzer was one of them. Ed Kaye, Steve Kenyon,
What about Gary Campbell?
and yeah. Well, at first he wasn't there. Let me think. The first. No, that's right. He was there when I first got there. Gary Keller came in later. after Gary Campbell left. So, and that's when I met Gary, when I went down there. And of course, his practice method is something that really is a huge part of how I work. And I talk about it in the book.
You talking about Gary Campbell or?
Gary Campbell, yeah.
Yeah, right.
He was he was a big influence on me.
That's what I thought. Yeah, I could hear that in you. And Gary also helped me a lot when I was a teenager and everything. I was around the university with Jerry Coker,
Mm-hmm.
and I was like a soloist with the university band while I was in high school, you know. And Gary took me aside, and you know, basically that whole concept of the patterns and everything was, you know, Gary showed me how you do that, you know, how you practice them and what you go about. And one time he showed me a bunch of stuff on the augmented scale. He said, "I just want to hear what you'll do with that." And
Yeah.
you know, but and Kenyon was there. Was Kenyon a student teacher at the time, or he was just a fellow student?
A fellow student. Yeah, so we had the, you know, they call it the concert jazz band. That's the equivalent of the 1 o'clock jazz band at North Texas. So we had a great band. The sax section was Steve Kenyon, Ed Kaye, Andy Schnitzer, and a baritone player named Eddie Maynard. And that band went to Europe. I guess it would have been the summer of '82. You know, played all the jazz festivals, and that's when another time I got a chance to hang out with Michael because he was there with the Brecker brothers. So, you know, those are another set of core musical memories.
Yeah, Vince I knew when I was in high school, and actually he was playing piano with Ira Sullivan
Mm-hmm.
at that time quite a bit. And I actually was Vince. Uh, I took him. He took me aside, and he didn't charge me for lessons because I didn't have any money anyway. So, but Vince said you can come over, and he played with Don Mast,
Mm-hmm.
bass player a lot. So I would come over and jam. He'd spend a whole afternoon just playing with me with Don Mast, and then he'd sit down and show me, you know, voicings. And I was already living with Tony Castellano a lot of the time. Did you know Tony and Dolph down there?
Yeah. I was aware of them. I didn't know them personally, but yeah, of course I knew who they were.
But
And then you came in. I remember one you did. You know, I think it was every Friday. They call it the Jazz Forum.
11 o'clock in the morning forum.
And you came in and did one, and that's also one of my core memory live recordings that I have that changed my life. So that's when I think that's one of the first times I think that might have been the first time I heard you. I was aware of you, and then that's how our relationship started. Is
Right. You asked me to take a lesson, and I think that we got together, and I said I should be studying with this guy. But you know, um, you know, because you knocked me out. I remember that. And then we jammed a few times when I was down there.
And then we jammed a couple times. Yeah, I remember. Yeah,
You know, and
life changing every time.
oh man, thank you. Yeah, and you worked both ways. You know, you were playing great.
Yeah.
And you know, I remember we did it. That forum was 11 in the morning, and there's a funny story with Ira. One time, it wasn't the forum that you heard. By the way, that was the first time I met Steve Kenyon at the same time I met you.
Mm-hmm.
And a month or two later, I gave Steve a lesson while we were down there, and Steve has become we've been friends since then. We've stayed in touch, and you know, in fact, there's a book of transcriptions of my solos coming out that Steve has been transcribing.
Well, sorry to interrupt, but from that forum, Steve transcribed one of your solos, and I have that somewhere. And that's one, yeah, that made a huge influence on me because I heard the solo and then he wrote it out. So I have that as part of my collection.
Oh wow, you always see that? He said that to me. That was the first time anybody ever transcribed something I'd done.
Mm-hmm.
I'd never seen it before. I looked at it. Of course, I couldn't read it. I couldn't even begin to
right,
get.
I know.
But he sent me the little cassette tape along with it, which was good. And you know, I mean, that was very, you know, it was adorable that he did that. And yeah, that was. I remember that concert. I think we played Tune Up. He sent me my Tune Up solo.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, but one day anyway, we did a different year, and we had this thing with Ira Sullivan to do an 11 o'clock in the morning forum.
Mm-hmm.
And Guy Viveros and Ira, I think Don Kaufman and me, and Tony Castellano.
Right.
And we had played the night before. So we figured it was best, since the thing was 11 o'clock in the morning, just don't go to sleep. Who's going to
Just
go to
stay
sleep?
up, of course.
We'll just stay up all night. And so we finished the gig at the Rancher. Ira finished, we play. They're done at like about 3:30 in the morning. 4 o'clock, we go to Tyler's for breakfast, and sit there. And then that takes us into about 7:30.
Yeah, right.
So then we're in the car and we're, we've been drinking wine and stuff, and we're in the car and, we're getting a little tired, but, it's going to be okay. So we hang out and talk, and everybody's having a good time. 11 o'clock in the morning, well, we pull up there, and we look like a really motley crew, man. We're
Oh,
we're disheveled. We've been up all night. We're there, and we set up, get the horn out, and the guy gets behind the drums, and Ira goes to the microphone, and really deadpan, he says to the crowd of college kids, he points to us, and he says, "Do not let this happen to you."
yes.
Did you get next to Ira some down there? And
I went to the church a couple times and jammed, but I was, like I said, I was more on the shy side, so I was a little kind of intimidated, not because he wasn't cool, but I was just a little afraid to approach him since he was such a kind of mythic figure. So I would like to have known him better, unfortunately, but I did get a chance to jam at the church a couple times with him.
and was Joe DiOrio down there too at that time?
The name, I know Joe, I know the name, but I can't remember him being at any of the actual sessions.
Yeah, Joe was the first guy that turned me on to the Slonimsky book,
Okay, yeah.
the florist, and he. So okay, so you are in Miami, and you've you went back. That's right. New Orleans was the next place you went, right?
Yeah, I was in Miami with no, I guess I was planning on kind of graduating from there, but I always, kind of the ultimate goal was to end up in New York. But at the time I was in Miami, some friends of mine, actually some relatives from Detroit, got a gig at the new Sheraton Hotel that was just opened up in New Orleans. And it was a kind of gig where they were playing just jazz in the lounge in the lobby. But it was 6 nights a week, and we got a free room in the hotel. And it was cousins that I grew up with. So, I don't even remember what it was, but, it was like steady pay for a couple months. So I decided to leave school or not come back to school. I think it happened in the summer. And that's when I moved to New Orleans. And we did that gig for a couple months, and the gig ended up ending, but I fell in love with the city and met a lot of great musicians there. So I just decided to stay. So like you said, you know how life just kind of points you in a certain direction. I'd never thought I would end up living in New Orleans, and that was a huge part of who I am musically, just because of the people I met there. And I was there for almost 5 years.
That long?
Yeah, because towards the end of it, I decided, since I was close to graduating, and I had a bunch of credits that transferred, I went to Loyola in New Orleans for the last year to get my degree.
I see. Is that where Bill Evans went?
No, he was in Baton Rouge.
Okay, I was just curious. I know he had gone to school.
I think it was LSU. Yeah, Louisiana State.
Right. I knew some connection he had with Louisiana as well. Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of ashamed to say it, but I've been to Europe 70 times. I've been to Chicago twice, and I've been to New Orleans never.
No, really.
And I always wanted to go down there, if for nothing else, to just eat.
Oh, it's incredible. Yeah, I was just there in January. There's the Jazz Education Network convention. So I played a couple gigs, did a master class, and saw all my friends. And yeah, it's one of my favorite places on the planet.
Oh man,
yeah,
that's beautiful. Now, at this point, you get to Miles. Right now, you're there, and you get a call from your high school buddy.
Yeah, so like it's amazing how life works. I was in New Orleans, and Matt Pearson got a job at Blue Note Records. This is an intern, but he said you should get a demo tape together and get it to me because I could play it for Bruce Lundvall, who's the president of the label at the time. So I put together some different live recordings, and then I think we went into the studio and recorded a couple of my originals. So I sent the tape to Matt, and Matt sent it. He played it for Bruce, but at the same time, unbeknownst to me, he also sent it to the studio where Miles was recording Amandla at the time.
Now, how old are you at this time?
It was 1988 or 89, so 27 or 28, I guess. So this is before I moved to New York. I was still in New Orleans, but I sent the tape out, and Matt calls me and says Bruce heard the tape, and he said he wants to do a record with you. So that's kind of the story. It's like not what you know, it's who you know. That was a big part of it. Is just having somebody at the label to get it to the president of the company. But at the same time, it was like a couple months after I'd sent the tape out, I get a call in New Orleans, and it's Tommy LaPuma, who was producing Miles at the time. And he said, Rick, he said, I'm sorry it's taken so long. We've had the tape here and I just didn't get around to it. So Tommy listened to it, and he called Miles and he played it over the phone to Miles. And Miles said, tell him to call me because he has a job. So I got hired by Miles because he heard the tape over the phone that Matt sent to Tommy. So it was just, another strange coincidence and the way things work. And that happened before I moved to New York.
So then you actually see somebody. He said, "Come to New York," right? I mean, come and meet Miles because Miles wants to hire you, right? It was
Yeah. So I said Miles wants to meet you, and it's weird how certain things work because I literally have no memory of flying to New York, getting in a taxi. I don't know how I got into the city. It's like a complete blank, except I know that Miles he had an apartment at the Marriott Essex House, which is the hotel on Central Park South. And I was terrified, of course, because I didn't know if he's going to want me to play or what it was going to be. So I got up to the apartment, and there was a sign on the door that said, please take off your shoes. So I was standing there with my shoes and my horn.
this is Miles' apartment.
Yeah. So I was standing there with my shoes and my horn for about 15 minutes before I had the courage to knock on the door. And I finally knocked on the door, and when he opened the door, he had a smile and a vibe that put me at ease immediately. It was like meeting somebody who I'd known forever. So it was amazing. And the first thing he said to me is, and it's kind of embarrassing to say, but it makes a great story. He said, how the fuck did you learn to play like that? And I said, and luckily I thought on my feet. I said, I've been listening to you all these years. So that broke the ice between us. So he said, come on in. So I went in, and he didn't ask me to play. He had a dining room table with a bunch of papers and stuff on it. He was looking for a couple cassette tapes, some live, some gig tapes. So he found two of them and he gave them to me. He said, I'll see you on stage. So luckily I had seen the show a couple times. It was the band with Kenny Garrett and Foley and Ricky Wellman. It was kind of the last incarnation of his band. So I just transcribed a couple of the melodies, and the first gig I did was with Kenny. The idea was to have two saxophones.
Right.
But that night, Miles collapsed after the show. He fainted. And yeah, we were I always remember this too. We were in Stockholm. And after the gig, like I said, Miles fainted. So the next day, we're getting ready to get on the bus, and Miles says, I'm really sorry, but I can't have an extra person on stage right now. It's too much energy for me to try to incorporate another person soloing and, whatever.
Well, that's short lived. You mean you met him in New York. He went all the way to Stockholm to play one night.
Played one night, and I was on a plane back the next day. You know, they paid me 2 weeks notice, and he said, "I'll call you when Kenny leaves." So I was definitely
Yeah.
shell shocked. I was
Oh,
like,
yeah.
what just happened? Um, but it was about a month later, they were getting ready to go on this next tour, and Kenny, I guess at the last minute, decided he wanted more money or something, and they didn't want to give it to him. So he got his suitcases and he just left at the airport. So Miles called me. He said, "Kenny just left, and we need you." So I had like 2 days to get all my shit together and meet him for this next tour, which was like a 6-week tour. And this, ironically, the first gig was in Stockholm. It was at the same place where we last played. So there was like this gap in
Same
between.
place.
The same place.
Wow, that's like a deja vu. I mean, just
Yeah, yeah.
time stopped and just a month in between. How was it, a month or two? Or
It was a couple months, yeah.
yeah, and then you're back to the same scene.
Back to the same thing. But it was just at that point, it was just me. And yeah, so that was 1989, and we did a 6-week tour this summer, in a 6-week summer tour. And yeah, that was life, of course, life changing. It wasn't the greatest experience musically in terms of a band, but seeing him operate in those conditions and just watching him move and maneuver was, something that I'll always, it's a huge part of me, of course.
Well, yeah, getting to be just around the vibe of, Miles Davis as a shell of himself is still more than most people ever become.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
So, and he did not live that much longer. I think just a year or two.
Yeah, what year did he die? Was it 92,
I'm not sure.
91, 92?
I'm not so good with dates.
Yeah, I should know that. But yeah, it was only a couple of years after. Um, Unfortunately, the next tour that we were supposed to do, I had signed a contract to be part of this jazz festival at Mount Fuji as part of being on Blue Note. So I had a conflict with the beginning of the next tour. So I said, "Miles," and I was terrified to, of course, ask him. I said, "But I can't make the first 2 days because I have this contract." He said, "Don't worry about it. We'll get Gary Thomas to come out." So I thought everything was cool. But in the meantime, Kenny called Miles and said he wanted to come back. So that may have happened even if I had not asked him for those first 2 nights off. We'll never know. But anyway, Kenny came back, and he played with Miles to the end. Yeah.
Well, yeah, Gary Barth said I didn't really know Miles, but I met him once. Dave Liebman introduced me, but um, that Miles was very familial when you were on the band for any length of time. He really did treat you.
Yeah.
The band was. I think Gary said something like, other cats you could if you missed a gig or you did something off the wall, they might fire you or this and that. He said, but Miles would understand. Oh, you missed a night? Okay, don't worry about it. Or, you know, um, well, at least you did have that experience, and you had made some two or three to a couple records of your own at that point too, right? For Blue Note. Um, how long did you record for them? And what
Yeah.
was that? The experience of record companies and that kind of thing. I never had a major record company uh, behind me, or this. I mean, I made a record for Vanguard, and that had some terrible business repercussions.
Mm-hmm.
Not going to talk about now, but
Mm-hmm.
Xanadu, Don Schlitten was very nice. A couple of records I made for him, but he didn't have a lot of money to promote him and this and that. So, I saw, I'd be seeing your name around, and I was happy for you. I remember saying, "Oh man, so they discovered Rick, recording for Blue Note." And can you tell me a little bit about that whole history with Blue Note and
Sure.
Blue Note, all that stuff?
Yeah. So Matt, he was there as an intern, but of course he had eyes on becoming a producer, and he got me into the label. So the first record we did was 1989, and we did one record every year. So I did three records with them. And, you know, at that point, I was really influenced a lot by Moutin and Steps Ahead, you know, that kind of world, a little bit of the Yellow Jackets kind of thing. So my first two records weren't technically Blue Note records because we used some synthesizers and overdubbed and some vocals. And the third record I did was a straight ahead record. And now hindsight, right, is 2020. If I'd had a chance to do things differently, I would have made that record first, the straight ahead record, because a lot of critics didn't understand what we were doing on Blue Note with the type of music that my first two records were. And also because Matt and I were so young and inexperienced, we spent a lot of money because they kind of gave us carte blanche. So it was cool, we had fun, but by the time we did the first two records, we owed the label like $70,000 or something because we spent so much money on the recordings. And then the third record we spent, it was only like 2,000 or 3,000. We went in and did a live to 2-track, just quartet. So if I would have done that record first, gotten the critics on my side from that angle and not spend as much money for the company, then things would have been different. But, you know, like I said, that's what happened.
You would learn. Yeah, that was, now the record, This Is New, that's on a different label, right? Because I heard something.
That's the third one I did for Blue Note.
That's the third one. I like that, and I didn't hear the other ones, you know, but I did listen to some of that record. I thought it was beautiful.
That's funny because that's when people talk about my early recordings, they always say that that's the one that stands out. And to me, it's the one I like kind of least because you know, this is very personal saxophone players. I could not find a reed that vibrated. So whenever I listen to that record, I have the feeling of what my horn felt like that day. So I'm not crazy about my sound. But people love that record, so I have to give it up to, you know, people whose opinion I really respect. So there has to be something there, but it's not one of my favorites.
That's funny because I mean, your read sounds fine to me. We're joined here. Steve Kenyon is here.
Hey, Bob.
Hey, Steve.
How you doing, man?
I'm okay. Yeah, I'm having fun with Rick. We've been.
I bet. I guess I missed most of it, but that's cool. I'm not gonna try to catch up with the last hour and a half. But I did want to say hi and say hi to Rick. It's been a long time since I saw Rick.
Steve,
and
Steve, buddy.
Man. Yeah, man. Are you in Paris?
I'm in Paris, and one of the things we were talking about was the forum in Miami that Bob did that changed my life. And you transcribed one of the solos from that forum, and I remember you being there and us listening to him together.
Yes, indeed.
Is it something to live for? Is that the tune?
Well, that was one I did.
Yeah,
that was the second one that he played. I Want Something to Live For. And then maybe you weren't there in 1980 because that was the first time I heard him play.
Yeah, I wasn't there for that one.
And from that one I transcribed Tune Up.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, and I had my little Super Scope there, you know, on my lap, recording, and then ran to the practice room to transcribe it. But yeah, it totally changed my life. My God.
Well, thank you guys both.
I'd never heard anything like that.
You guys play great, so if I had anything to do with that, boy, thank you very much.
Well, you absolutely did. And then I remember the second time, the one you're talking about, Rick, I brought that transcription with me when Bob came back, and I gave him a copy of it, and he was so sweet, and he was like, "Wow, man, that's so great! You transcribed my solo. I'll give you a free lesson," and he did. And we ended up having, you know, quite a few lessons over the next couple of years. It was one of the best things that happened to me in Miami, for sure.
Oh, that's all nice. That's sweet. I appreciate that.
I do have a tape of that forum someplace. I think Steve, I don't know if you remember this. Did he start with the "It Could Happen to You"?
I think he did. Yes.
Yeah.
I think he did.
Yeah, I remember that.
Somewhere I have tapes of like maybe 3 or 4 of those forums, and they're priceless. And I really need to transfer them to like some kind of digital medium because they're on like 90-minute cassettes.
You know, I find I've got this Walter Davis Jr. record coming out now, that we did in 19, um, what was it, 1980, 87, 88. And it's been sitting there. It's a concert we did in Salerno. It's been sitting there since from then till now. And finally, Corey Weeds is going to release it on Cellar Jazz. And, you know, it's quite a nice concert. And Walter Davis Jr. is very underrepresented.
Yeah.
You know, so I mean, anything you find, maybe somebody would want to put this stuff out because it's, there is, you know, there's quite a good amount of music. I think probably you guys both have music that you've done on your own that's never come out too.
Oh, of course. I think everyone does, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, let's start a record company.
Yeah, how hard could it be? How much money can we lose, Bob?
How much money? You already lost that money for Blue Note, so maybe the karma will come back now. You know how to do a record for $3,000. You know, I mean.
Man, I still get royalty statements from them with like a negative 75,000. So technically, I literally do. So I have to sell like 70,000 copies before I start seeing any royalties from them.
Wow, that's amazing. I don't know if you guys talked about this, Rick, but have you figured out the streaming thing working for your stuff?
No, I do know that Blue Note just re-released all that stuff because it wasn't available for years. So at least the music is available to people, but the amount of money that we're making is like, you know, fractions of a cent. So
it's insanely small, yeah. But I know that some people who have like monetized it themselves, like not through a record company, you know, can like actually sort of do okay.
There's ways, there are ways to do it. I think it's a younger man's game.
I think you're right.
For those of you who don't know, by the way, the gentleman who's joined us here is Steve Kenyon, and just a brief bio of Steve Kenyon, because it would take a while to really say all the wonderful things that he's done in music. But Steve is one of the top section doublers and contractors in New York. Broadway shows, Steve will get the band together for that and play the reeds that are necessary in it. He's been on the new West Side Story soundtrack of Spielberg, and he does the National Awards orchestra at the Kennedy Center, and you know what, and many things. He's also a great jazz player, and you know, and we have been friends, and you know, for since this time that we're talking about 40 something years.
Yeah, 44 years.
Wow.
It was January 1980 the first time I heard. I remember walking down the hall, the Foster building, and they always had a sign up on the door like who was playing the jazz for him. And they had a sign that said Bobby Mover. Mm-hmm. And people, you know, like kids like me were like, "Hey, who's Bobby Mover?" And we found out who Bobby Mover was. And Bob, you said that was like a brief period when everybody called you Bobby, right? Because
in Miami they called me Bobby. This is kind of funny. I was so fat when I was a little kid. I was like 16 years old, and I weighed about 230 pounds, and they called me Little Bobby. Little Bobby coming over. You know? So, but then that I remember I saw that said Bobby Mover at the forum. I said, man, nobody's called me that. You know, it's my mother. You know, the funniest poster I've ever seen though is that. But I was in a town in Italy, and I forget which town it was, but one of the small little towns, you know, and there was a sign when I got off the train. I saw a poster in the train station, and it said Bob Mover, and there was a picture of this big black fellow with the tenor. And it was not somebody I really recognized, but I knew it wasn't me. So I went in and I said, you know, you've got the picture my name under this picture, and it says he's playing tonight. And they said, oh, you're not Nathan. They said, oh, we must have gotten confused. There were 2 jazz concerts that summer in that town. One was me, and one was Nathan Page.
Oh,
Nathan Page was a tenor player from Pittsburgh, African American fellow. So they said, "Oh my gosh, you both had press kits, and we must have gotten the photos mixed up." So when we printed up the posters, he's there with your picture, and you're here with his picture. I said, "Well, it's good I played the first concert because I think he'd be madder than I am."
that's funny. Oh man.
But I want to get to one thing that Rick moved to New York, which we're doing. This I just one or two more questions about this. Actually, we could probably, I think, stop right around here. Um, that okay? So you did these records for Blue Note, and when you went back to be with Miles, now are you living in New York? You moved to New York.
I moved to New York when I guess I moved in end of 1988. So I was there when we recorded my first three records. And then, once the deal with Blue Note ended, I just stayed in New York and, became a working musician in town, coming to Europe, touring. I recorded for a couple smaller labels for Challenge Records, which is based in the Netherlands. And then I did a couple for Palmetto, one for Steeplechase. So yeah, I lived in New York for about 10 years. So the first three were kind of the Blue Note years, and the rest was just living and working and jamming and, like all of us do, just trying to.
What part of town do you live in?
At first was Astoria, part of a nucleus of guys who were there jamming and playing, almost every day. I still look back on those days with really, really fond memories. And then I had a couple illegal sublets on the Upper West Side for a while. I also lived in Washington Heights. I actually, after Astoria, I met a woman and we lived together for about 5 years. So that's the big chunk of time was spent, 185th Street.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, I was Upper West Side.
And then Paris you've been in Paris about, 22 years now?
Yeah, I moved in 2003. So at this time, I was in New Orleans. I was in New York, and we were living in an illegal sublet that was actually an apartment of Tim Reese's.
Oh, Tim.
And we ended up getting caught. So I had to find a place to live. And at this point, at that point, it was rough to find an apartment in New York, as it is always. And I got asked to join a French band that's called the Moutin Reunion Quartet, was with bassist François Moutin, who's a New Yorker. And at that time, a friend of mine in Paris who knew I was talking and thinking about living here just called me and said, I have an apartment and I'm moving and I can just sign my lease over to you. So it's like I needed a place to live. I got a gig in France with some French people, and an apartment was offered to me in Paris. So it's like the universe gave me like three big signs that you should make this move.
What at the end? This is the apartment you've stayed in all that time?
And I've been here. Yeah, I've been here since then. And I didn't want to regret not taking the chance. I thought if I didn't like it, I could always move back, but I didn't want to regret not coming.
And you got a gig pretty soon at the Conservatoire de Paris.
Well, no, I did some master classes there. It was about 5 or 6 years I was here just working with the Moutin brothers and just traveling around Europe. And then I actually started teaching at a school called the American School of Modern Music. And that I did more as a means to an end, just to get my French paperwork together and kind of be here living legally. So I continue to do that, but it's only a couple days a week teaching harmony and composition and arranging. No real saxophone, any kind of steady saxophone teaching, which I find a little more interesting, teaching just about music than actual mechanics of the horn.
I don't like teaching mechanics of the horn, I'll tell you.
I can't do it. I'm not good at it. I can give guys 1 or 2 lessons, and after that, it's like, now you know what to do, just go practice.
Yeah, one thing I like about teaching virtually, and I've do quite a bit of that now since the pandemic, and I don't mind. When you teach the horn, you have to physically touch people. You've got to put your hand on their diaphragm and
yeah.
way. You've got to see their breathing. There's some physical touching involved with that, which I don't mind touching people, but it's like, the fact that you don't need to do that, I could concentrate more on teaching music.
Yeah, yeah.
Interests me more, to teach how that's put together. So, what part of Paris are you in, by the way?
I'm in the 11th, so I'm right between Republic and Bastille, more closer to Republic. So it's a really cool area of town. I'm in the center in 15 minutes on the subway, and it's a part of town that's open late, so there are a lot of things happening. A lot of bars and restaurants open, so there's a lot of activity.
I know that part,
Yeah.
I used to stay most of the time. I was on right near Gare de l'Est. There, in fact, I had a interesting the Hotel Paradis, which I would often stay when I was in Paris, which was an interesting name. The street it was on. It was on the corner of Rue de Paradis and Rue de la Fidélité. Paradise and Fidelity, where they come together. And so, I see. So life really had you leave New York. It just did it, pushed you in the direction of France, and
it just pointed me here. And I always, when I was in New York, like most of us, you come to Europe to really make a majority of your money and play more. I was in New York doing, just local gigs, but still having to play the occasional wedding to make money. And so it just seemed like the right thing to do. And Paris is really the kind of the center of Europe. So you're on the train in Germany, go to Brussels, Amsterdam, London. So it's, that's also what's nice about it. Is kind of a hub.
They have those fast trains now. What is it?
TGV. Yeah.
Trains. Yeah.
Yeah.
That you get there in no time. It's amazing. It's going to be quite a grueling, But I just remembered, I closed my eyes in Italy, and a minute later I was in France.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's wonderful. Do you run into over here? There's a lot of great musicians in Paris. I mean, the Parisians themselves. There's a piano player there, very world-class pianist that I used to love to play with there, named Alain Jean-Marie.
Yes, he's one of my favorites. He's not out that much, but of course I'm aware of him. We've played a lot in the past. I heard recently he may have fractured his wrist, so I think he's kind of out of commission for a while. But he's a sweet soul and an incredible musician.
He really is. He's and a great player. I mean,
absolutely.
Any tune, any key, any tempo.
He
didn't. He made a beautiful duet record with Barnet Willen too. And Barnet was kind of a, sort of an underrated. I mean, he did those things with Miles,
right?
The jazz track record, for the Louis Malle, La Sauce de l'Échafaud, and but and Kirk Lightsey is there too, right?
Kirk is here, but he's not. Well, also, the older you get, the harder it is to get out. So
yeah,
so he's not out as much, and like me, I'm not out to hear music as much as I used to go out. But so once in a while we'll cross paths at a festival or something, but not really kind of on the local scene here.
Right, and there's still. I remember there's, Tiberge and Glenn Ferris is still around.
Glenn Ferris just started a new band, and actually I didn't mention it, but the apartment I'm staying in is François Tiberge's old apartment. He's the one who called me and gave me this place. François.
Tiberge was my student in Montreal when I left New York to have.
Oh, I didn't realize that. Yeah.
My eldest daughter, I decided I didn't want to be in the rat race of New York, and that I would go. And then we moved to Montreal and later to Toronto. But in Montreal, I taught at a place called Concordia University, and Tiberge was going there at that point. So he and René Valduc and some of the better cats in Montreal were there, studying. There was a great teacher there called Charles Ellison, and trumpet player, but he taught them, a lot. Anyway, there was so say hi to those cats for me.
I will, for sure. Yeah, François is great spirit. Really funny. Great to be around.
Yeah, I mean, we laughed.
Great musician.
8 years ago, I played a gig at the Sunset and we hung out late into
Yeah.
the morning.
Uh-huh.
I heard from laughing actually afterwards. Anyway, this has been a real pleasure.
My pleasure, Bob. It's great to hang out like this.
And any new projects? We talked about the book. Anything you want to mention? You got a new recording, I think, coming out soon, or just
Well, the last thing I did has been out for a couple of years now. It's called Sacred Hearts. So over the pandemic, I did kind of a record at home. So it's kind of like a demo, but I have it's basically a whole album's worth of material that I would need to go into the studio and properly record. But so that might be the next thing I do. But I was also thinking about just recording a trio record, just bass and drums, and just going into the studio and just blowing some tunes and not doing something as produced as I usually do.
I'd like to hear you like that.
Yeah, I think that might be fun and actually more obviously affordable and a little bit more practical these days.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really keep up with everybody's records, but I did listen to some of this. This is new record, and I said, gee, and I looked at your other records, and it seemed like they were kind of produced, And I said, well, gee, he sounds good with a quartet here. You should do some of that. So I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, I was thinking about doing that standards trio record. Like the world needs another one.
Well, you never know. It depends who you get, and the luck of the draw. I mean, that day. I mean, I did a trio record. This one called "In the True Tradition."
Mm-hmm.
I didn't name, but the Rufus Reed was the bass player and drummer. Bobby Ward I brought down from Boston.
Uh-huh.
They had never even met.
Wow.
And we were supposed to record at 11 o'clock in the morning on, I think it was a Wednesday, and Tuesday night at 10 o'clock, Rufus had a garage in his house, which he turned into a kind of recording rehearsal studio.
Mm-hmm.
Bobby and I went up to Rufus's place. I think we started, it was about 9 o'clock in the evening. We played from 9 till 3, 4 in the morning. And that was in Jersey. Then we took the train back to New York and got to sleep at about 6 in the morning, slept for 3 hours, went to the studio, and we made quite a good record, I thought.
I think that's a desert island record, Bob. I think that might be your best record, but it's hard to pick.
I don't know that one. I'm gonna search for it. Is it available on? Is it out there? I mean,
I can send it to you. No, somebody told Ira Sullivan and I one night, you guys, your records are collector's items before they're released. I think you've now joined us in that category.
I think everyone has now.
Yeah, now everybody has. But we could send you a little bit of that because Xanadu was sold to EMI, which was sold to So I'll just send it to you.
Oh, I would love to hear that. So it's not on YouTube or anything like that, right?
There are a couple tracks on YouTube that, but I think we can send him the record, Jesse, right? So, just do that. Anyway, we're going to get back to the show and say goodbye to everybody. So, well, I think we've really gone through a lot of things and gotten a lot of insights into the brilliant mind and soul of Rick Margitza. And it's been such a pleasure catching up with you.
Likewise.
And I thank the wonderful Steve Kenyon for.
I can't wait to see the first hour and a half or however long it was since I just got here.
Yeah, but thank you for falling by. Steve is in the middle of an intermission from a Broadway show today. You're playing Sweeney Todd, right?
Right.
So he's here in between murders.
That's right. Very artful murders. Yes.
Artful murders.
Yeah.
And
well, Steve, it's great seeing you. And I guess Bob said you have a date with your wife later, so happy Valentine's Day.
Thanks. Yeah. In fact, I'm gonna split right now because she's waiting for me around the corner. So
it's Ruth, right?
Yeah, it's still Ruth.
send her, I didn't say still, but I thought I remember her name. So send her my love for sure.
Very good. Good memory.
Well, once again, thank you, Steve, and thank you, Jesse, for your wonderful production skills going into this. and the great Rick Margitza.
Yeah.
Pleasure. We have some other guests coming up soon. I think next week I'm going to tell some stories again. Just you seem to like that. Sometimes I just do this by myself and reminisce. Um, but anyway, for uh, more episodes of On the Real Side, if you enjoyed this, give us a like. And for more of these, this story and others like it, you can see our back. Our what would you say? Our back load of stories. If you go to @BobMover Jazzability on the Real Side. So thank you again, and we will see you next time. Bye bye.
Thanks.
God bless.